There we go. I'm doing okay. It was I was quite hesitant to take today for streaming. Usually I actually have Wednesday off, which I found it a little bit strange that they decided to do the day off Twitch on Wednesdays, considering that's usually the deadest day of all streams. So it's the day that would hit Twitch the least. But it seems to be having an effect. Anyway, yeah, I'm doing okay. I ended up taking today off of work just because I haven't been feeling so great lately, and ended up getting a lot of work done as a result. Ironically, I can't just take a day off of work. I've noticed this about myself because I'm always working on something for the stream or for like I did my resume all last night, just trying to get that up. Do the whole job situation. So things have been pretty all right. Have you been around for one of my story nights, Foxfan? Okay. Well, general idea is that we have a story module that's part of the bot. Um, and you can submit stories to this as well. All of these are submitted by users. The big deal with these is that they have to be content appropriate, and if they are like some sort of rough or harder to talk about content, it must be specific, like it must be necessary for the plot. I also have to ask whoever wrote the story if I can. Sometimes some of the stories are anonymous, and in that case, you can't really do anything. But yeah, I have to ask the author for permission before I actually approve them. And once they're approved, it just goes on that list, and I do these. Some of these are pretty long. Some of these are mine, actually, today. Guardian is one of my own stories that I've written, which I'm actually really hoping that I can do a good showing on that, because I really liked writing Guardian. A couple of authors have refused, yeah. By and large, most of them are like, yeah, go ahead. And I'll just let them know or something before I start. Let's see. But most authors seem to be pretty fine with it. The ones that have refused usually end up giving a reason and wish me luck regardless. So none of them have been like impolite or anything like that. It's a really good time most of the time. Actually, I think I've only had one person that was just like, fuck off. Otherwise, it ended up working out pretty well. Currently, we only have one pending story. Also, I'm just kind of stalling right now so that people have a chance to join. Since I haven't done a stream in a while, I'm not sure how many people are actually checking for notifications. And I don't usually do Wednesday streams, so I'm even more surprised if more people show up today. Yeah, the Hammer. So unfortunately, I think the author of Hammer is inactive on Reddit, which is where it was initially submitted. Yeah, anyway. A couple of authors have actually given me express permission to look at some of their other works too, which is kind of nice. One of the things that I want to add is a way to submit or like list the author when you submit a story, so that if they're on a like auto approve list, then it just gets approved straight to the story list instead of going into pending. I haven't done that yet, mostly because it's kind of low priority, especially with Moonrise coming on. That reminds me, is it? Yes, it is 7 o'clock. I'm just checking. Yes. Okay, sweet. So I just checked the logs on the bot, and it looks like the bot did indeed switch to weekday. So at the beginning of the weekday streams, the bot is switching back and forth between weekend and weekday streams, and that's really good. Anywho, so let's go ahead and start this up. We'll roll randomly. Oh, hey, Dr. Blackjack. Blackjack is the author of, was it Howdy from Hell, I think? You got tricked into joining by the possibility someone might be gullible or nice enough to read one of your stories here. I haven't, so this is probably something that I do need to do more. I actually should probably read some of the stories that are submitted so that I have a bit of an idea of what I'm reading. I don't read a lot of the stories before I show up or before I start my streams. Some of these, like I was talking about one of the ones on the list today, Guardian. Oh, didn't? Sometimes this doesn't show up on. Also, apologies for the halting speech. For right now, this is like the best that I've been in ages. I don't know why, but I've been having a bad time. Last 2 days, I ended up taking off just because I was exhausted after work, and then today I just took work off entirely. And I don't regret taking work off entirely because, for one thing, I don't really like my job right now, and I'm going to have to go back and explain stuff tomorrow. But whatever, I'll reach that bridge when I burn it. And when I burn it, I'll have another job, hopefully. God knows I've got enough people reaching out. How are you doing, Dr. Blackjack? Okay. Anywho, let's go ahead and roll. So the way that I do stuff here is I roll randomly from that list of stories that I showed. What did we get? We got Wizard LARP. Oh, this is a long one. Oh, no. So I'm not going to read all of this in one go. You guys can take a look at this, but this is a D&D green text story. So this is an anonymous one. I couldn't actually find, obviously the author isn't really listed anywhere. But, oh God, where was I? A little bit of a recap. This is about someone who had a wizard LARP at some point and just encountered one of the worst LARPers ever. What a one to start off. You know what? No, I'm not going to start off with this one. We're going to restore this one. I want to pick another one. And if it rolls again, then I'm going to be sad. Oh, fine. I got to find where I stopped last time. Because this one was one that I started up on a previous stream. And then just, it keeps going and going and going. It was the end of part 1. Oh, God. There's a reason that this is one of the few stories that I didn't end up editing because it's so long. God, also I'm super nervous because I don't usually have authors in chat, so thank you for showing up, by the way, Dr. Blackjack. I'm actually really surprised. I mean, I know you said you would, but still. Goddamn, where is the end of part 1? Ah, okay, yes. So the end of part 1 is actually literally just the end of the first chapter. Or end of the first line. And then it's the second part. Or the second column. You like showing up and doing cameos? I have a quick question. Is English your first language or is it a learned language for you? Please don't take that the wrong way. I've done like people who've done stories without having English as their first language. I'm just mentally preparing myself sometimes. Okay. Oh God, this is gonna take forever. Ooh, wow. Dude, you typed all of that on your phone? I mean, I've done phone typing stories, but they usually end up being really short or simplistic. Like, I did my Myth of Zepnos story when just through the phone. Mostly because it was like, oh, I had an idea at that time. Most of the rest of my stuff, I usually sit down during the weekend and type something out. Okay. Gotcha. All right, I found where we need to start. Let's go ahead and do so. I waited in the darkness of the small closet, collecting my thoughts, trying to come to terms with what was happening. Oh, right, recap. Main character ended up finding a troll's worth of dungeons or of gold, and they took all of that gold. It ended up being 30 gold, which would have destabilized the entire gold economy of the LARP. The noble who was in control of most of the LARP decided to put him into the jail because it was supposed to be gold for another player, and that player ended up getting killed by the troll that they killed to get the gold from initially. So a combination of bad LARPing and corrupt politicians. Fun. Anyway. I waited in the darkness of the small closet, collecting my thoughts, trying to come in terms with what was happening. In a way, I was actually fortunate to have that little time out. It gave me time to think and question. I began to question what my next line of action was. My first option, and the most obvious one, was to just accept the sentence. Being executed meant that I was permanently killed, in a way that prevented resurrection. I was a first-level character, and starting up a new character wouldn't really change much. More importantly, it was the only choice that was presented to me, as neither negotiating for a fair trial nor escaping really seemed like an option. But every fiber of who I was did not want to be executed, even if it was just for pretend in a pretend world. Even if the circumstances around it were all make-believe, my innocence was real. Every ounce of rebellious spirit that I had in me said to find some way out of this mess, to oppose the tyrannical decision of Ulsik and the apathy of the populace that enabled it. Ulsik is that noble I mentioned. Even though I found my resolve, I still could not find any way to remedy my situation. Hardul and Lith came to visit me, leading me out of the cramped closet. They tried to convince me that all I could do was accept the execution and try to make it a fun role-playing experience. I told them that they could have a fun role-playing experience in helping me escape. With a rather downcast look, Hardul explained that there was no way he could oppose Ulsik, especially because it was because of him that he had finally become a noble. Not to mention that Ulsik was possibly the strongest person in the game. Lith simply said that it would be easier for me to just make a new character rather than try to iron out all the problems this one had. He even said I could make him identical to Nephim, except I'd have to change his name. Lith and Ulsik are friends of the player character, by the way. They had convinced him to join the RP in the first place. We argued a bit more until it became clear that they wouldn't help me willingly. I then asked them why they even bothered to come see me, if all they were going to do was tell me my only choice was death. At this point, Hardul actually became somewhat angry, telling me that it had not been easy for him to come see me, and that he actually had to use his rank as a noble to get this chance. I responded with the question of whether he had actually bothered to take me out of why he had actually bothered to take me out of my cramped cell. Looking at the closet I was no longer in, Hardul calmed down slightly, said that it was obvious that he had, not realizing my intention. I bolted. I was almost out of the door before either of them realized what I was doing. They began to shout, but by the time someone took notice, I was a good safe distance. A low-level mage tried to throw spells at me, but his throws were short, and a moment later I disappeared into the woods. Running far, deep into the middle of the camping grounds, I found a small ring of dense bushes in the wooded spot that was well away from the main roads. Moving into the center of them and feeling rather secure about not being spotted within them, I sat down and began to think about what to do next. Before I decided to do anything else, I realized I needed to get myself prepared in order to be a fugitive. I needed to get three major things: food, a place to sleep, and perhaps the most important, a weapon. Once I had those three, I could decide on what to do next. Food and a place to sleep were a problem. Meals were purchased at the inn, which was also the place where I was sure to find plenty of people who could kill me with a glance. Beyond that, I had brought a fair amount of snacks with me, probably enough that I wouldn't have to buy any food for the weekend. However, all these snacks were out my bags, which were in my cabin. That was also the place I was expected to sleep, which meant it was the place I was expected to go, which meant it was the place I expected they would try to catch me. If I was to even try to go there, I wanted to at least be armed with more than just a few bean bags. So the quality is way different. Gotcha. My character could only use a two-handed sword. Other mages typically could use daggers and small swords, but I had taken those points and added them just so that I could use a two-handed sword. My choice was made under the assumption that I'd never need or want to use a smaller sword, but now I was in a really bad situation. In order for me to get a new weapon, I had three options. Stealing an unattended one that a person owned meant that I had to get a specially sanctioned witness, which I knew was a stupid idea. I could always just break the rules, but that was grounds for being kicked out of the game itself. If I was going to do this, I was going to do this without anyone being able to condemn me for opposing the spirit of the game. If I broke a rule, nothing I did would matter, since they would just retcon everything. I had to beat them at their own game, with their own rules. That left either taking one from a fallen person, or I could just grab one from the piles of the cave. Neither of those options seemed very practical. There were very few players who used two-handed swords. Beyond just finding them, I'd have to defeat them unarmed. Going to the cave seemed smarter, since players avoided going near it, and there were undoubtedly weapons there. But I also had an enormous chance of running into a monster, who'd be more likely to be able to outrun me, considering the monsters I had seen were more athletic than the players. While I considered my options, I heard voices coming close. I knew that I was fairly safe within these bushes, invisible unless they decided to force their way through them, but I was still extremely nervous, holding my breath with the amateur thought that it would keep them from hearing me. As I listened, I realized that they were the three teenagers, one who I remembered quite clearly because of his awkward, cracking voice that was an absolute challenge to respond to, with the mindset that he was playing a gruff and strong warrior. Peering out from the bushes as they passed some distance away, I was very glad I had chosen neutral grays for my outfit rather than the flashy colors that seemed to be in fashion here. The three of them, all warriors, though none with a two-handed sword, wore bright colors that encouraged me to think of them as targets. Without a plan formed, I slowly slid out of the bushes, and then cautiously, silently, I moved after them. While I was still a good distance away, I threw my ice spell at the closest one, calling out the spell's name in the most intimidating voice I could. Hitting him squarely in the back, he froze in good faith of role-playing, while the other two wheeled nervously around. I hit the second before he had a chance to move, and the third kept close to his friend while I brandished another beanbag. Hey, Mango! What are you doing over on the YouTube side? Oh, right. Yes. Unfortunately, you know what? Mango's here, and I should actually totally talk about the charity while we're in the middle of this. We are currently doing a charity fundraiser for Rainforest Trust. If anyone would like to throw some money at that, please do. We are trying to hit 5,000, but that is across multiple streamers. Currently, we've just started it last week, and this is my first time that I've been able to actually do any fundraising since I started. So, yeah, just putting that out there right now. Yes, that is the correct link. Where was I? Counting down the 30 seconds in my head, I had very little time before the three of them tried to rush me. While my aim was solid, I doubted that I could hit them all without the element of surprise, especially since I had only managed to hit two while I had it. I asked them first what they were doing, and with a strange, obliging obedience, the lone mobile one answered curtly. Apparently, I had a 30 gold bounty on my head. This was an obscene amount of money for just catching such a weak fugitive, and I didn't blame them for trying to hunt me. I, however, was not going to just lie down and let them take it without a challenge. With the 30 seconds almost up, I knew that I'd have to run. Looking back in the opposite direction from them, I realized my cabin was in that direction. With a burst of inspiration, I ran directly at them. The three teens panicked, with no real reason, considering I didn't even have a weapon. But I kept well out of their swords' ranges, running around them in the direction opposite my cabin. I made an emphasis of my speed, running with the intent that no sane person would try to keep up with me, until I was a good distance away from the encounter. Seeing that I had no pursuers, I stopped to catch my breath, wondering whether I could keep up such a pace all day. I continued on a little further in that direction before I looped around, with the guess that the three were heading towards the inn, telling everyone where they had spotted me and where they thought I was going. If I had any chance of getting my stuff back from the cabin, this was it. The campgrounds were pretty large, and it could easily take more than an hour to walk from one end to the other. With a floating map fuzzily drawn in my mind, I tried to predict where people would be and where they'd be heading. Thankful for the extensive traveling I had done on the grounds of Grunk. On the grounds as a Grunk. This may sound like a pretty impressive ability, but it was me mostly trying to figure out how to avoid the main roads while taking all of the smaller paths. I did fairly well for myself, using a few paths that were practically hidden that I would never have known if I had not been shown by the old man who had led us, and managed to get close to my cabin with only hearing people in the distance. However, just as I neared it, voices surprised me from just beyond a bend in the path I was taking. I dove into the woods, glad that the road was somewhat elevated and that I was basically dropping into a ditch. A large group appeared from beyond the bend, and I nervously knew that I had no chance of staying undiscovered if they continued down the path. Thankfully, they took an earlier fork and moved away on a different larger path, but I managed to catch snippets of their conversation. My guess had been correct. They had been waiting for me at my cabin, and while they agreed that 30 gold was way too much just for capturing me, they, however, were not complaining. As soon as they had gone a good distance, I moved out of the ditch, dusting myself off. I didn't waste any more time and rushed into my cabin. With haste, I gathered my snacks together into my small sleeping bag, downed a candy bar and a bag of chips in the process. While it wasn't the most nutritious meal, it at least satisfied me. What was greater satisfaction was that I had managed to outwit everyone into thinking I was elsewhere. Everyone except Lith. Lith stood at the entrance, blocking it. His sword and shield were readied, and the look on his face said that it was not going to end well. Even so, I greeted him, telling him I planned on being a fugitive and that I could use all the help I could get. He responded simply, telling me that Hardol was no longer a noble, that he had been demoted because he had let me escape, and that now there was very little chance that Cerberus would become a noble house. I told Lith that it wasn't my fault, that it wasn't Hardol's fault, that all of this was because of Ulsik. I even wanted to tell him that Ulsik's whole plan was the original treasure. But I realized that that wouldn't sway him an inch. He just looked at me, knowing that I was unarmed, and calmly said that I should have just made a new character. I replied, slowly, knowing that I would regret the scene that followed. I said that I was just doing what my character would do, that all I was doing was role-playing, the thing we had come here to do. Lith agreed. He said that that was what we had come here to do, and that he was going to do, or what he was going to do now was just what his character would do, that all he was going to do was roleplay. He lunged forward. Hardul and Lith had both been giving each other advice, Hardul and Lith had both been giving me advice while I made the character, and both of them knew I had built him wrong. Compared to a pure warrior, I had lower stats across the board. Compared to a pure spellcaster, I had only a fraction of their spells, and the amount of times that I could cast them was worse still. I had decided to not specialize on a single school of magic, which meant that I had only the weakest of all three schools, except the 7 damage fire spell, which is the second weakest of the fire school. In the end, my character could not be a mage because he could not rely on his spells, and he was far weaker than any other fighter. However, in this exact situation, to both Lith's and my regret, I was invincible. As he lunged forward, I hit him with my ice spell. He was still blocking the lone exit, so he began to count to 30 aloud, trying to show me how futile that spell was. I then hit him with my 1 damage fire spell, and then hit him again. It then dawned on him what my plan was. Combining the schools of fire and ice, I had no chance of losing. He had no ranged attack, no defenses, nothing he could do. As the 30 seconds expired, I hit him with another ice spell, and this continued. His 22 HP dwindled rapidly until he was left with a single hit point. I renewed the ice spell, and then told him he should run to the inn and get healed. He was furious at first, but he seemed to realize just how terrible it would be for me to be the one to kill his character. As he nodded in agreement, I put down my hand, glad that this had not turned out worse. As the ice spell expired, he lunged forward at me. He would have hit me. He had actually surprised me, shocked me to the point where there was no way I could have consciously reacted. Had I not been casting the same fire spell over and over for the last 5 minutes, I probably would have been captured right there, unable to defend myself against him after he closed the gap between him and me. But the spell had been drilled into my mind, and I reflexively acted, tossing the beanbag at him before he came within reach. As he dropped to the ground, defiantly silent, I panicked. I needed to get a healer to him quickly, but there was no way for a fugitive to do so. Were I to go to the inn, I would simply be captured or killed, and even then there was little chance a healer would reach Lith in time. Finding one by chance on the road was a long shot as well, and I was very much likely to just run into a group of bounty hunters or monsters. With a glance at my watch, I saw that he had very little time before his first 5 minutes were up, meaning that he would require advanced healing, not just basic healing like the spell I had. After realizing how stupid I was, I found myself debating whether I should just use one of my 2 remaining healing spells on a person I myself had damaged. I knew that I was going to need them later if I was expecting to survive as a fugitive, and there'd be no way I could get healing. Knowing Lith would never forgive me if I was the one that killed him, it became a very easy choice. I kicked aside his sword and shield, well out of his reach. Grabbing my sleeping bag, I knelt down beside him, apologizing that things had turned out like this. As soon as I healed him, before he could get up, I hit him with an ice spell. I then ran out of the cabin, food and sleeping gear triumphantly in tow, but wondering if it had been worth it. By now, it was late in the afternoon. With food obtained, I decided I'd do the next best thing, which was find a place to sleep and leave my stuff. And that may be one of the better things about LARPing. When playing a tabletop role-playing game, carrying gear and sleeping meant absolutely nothing to the point where I wouldn't even keep track of it. At a LARP, you learn to appreciate being able to ignore those things. Here, I would have a hard time escaping my pursuers if I had to carry a sleeping bag filled with food while doing so. And while sleeping in the woods was just my sleeping bag was a possibility, I wasn't going to do it if I didn't have to. Besides, the cabins were scattered about the campgrounds, where there were other small buildings and sites like picnic grounds and tables. That might be better at sleeping, or better to sleep at. My first choice would be to find a cabin that had been left unassigned, but this was also the most risky. It would be a really bad scene to think a cabin was unoccupied, and then to find out that it wasn't. Even so, the exciting prospect of sleeping in an equipment shed or outhouse wasn't enough to dissuade me from taking the risk. Traveling far away from the inn to the cabins, I assumed they would assign last. I found myself encountering less and less people and having to hide less and less often. The people who were pursuing me, who I assumed were everyone, considering the size of the bounty, I really didn't seem keen on doing a good job looking for me. They were just patrolling around the main roads, not bothering to poke around the smaller ones, let alone the woods. With the whole campgrounds to look over, I realized that within the outskirt reaches, I could basically move around without really having fear of being found. I stalked several cabins, watching them from a distance. When it seemed like no one was around, I'd run up, check to see if there was any signs of people there, and if I saw bags lying around, I'd go to the next cabin. Finally, just as it was getting dark, I found a cabin that was well detached from all the others. Peering inside, I saw that there was no sign of anyone having been there. As I tried the front door and found it locked, I began to wonder if what I was about to do was going to be considered unlawful entry. I tried one of the windows, which were almost rustic with their simplicity, and opened it without difficulty. Inside, it was fairly bare beyond wood bed frames and plastic-wrapped mattresses, but there was a small kitchen and bathroom. After relaxing myself and getting a nice drink of tap water, I located a closet. Inside, it was not very large, but there was enough room for me to sleep in if I slept in the fetal position. While sleeping on a mattress would be infinitely more comfortable, I wasn't going to be taking any more chances than I already was. But now was not the time to even consider sleeping, so I just downed a few more snacks, put my gear in the closet, and left through the window. It was getting fairly dark, which was to my advantage. I've always had good night vision, meaning that poor light would only serve to hide me from my enemies. While I never prided myself on being stealthy, I guess that might have been because I had never had the chance to test myself. Even now, though I still wouldn't consider it to be one of my skills, considering that the people I was sneaking around were often obviously not looking for anyone, it seemed that most people had given up on actively searching for me, which made my life all the easier. However, it didn't solve my major problems. I decided to take a weapon from the cave. Moving towards it, I determined my earlier fears had not been misguided. Were it not for the darkness, I probably would have been quickly discovered and attacked by the monsters that wandered around near it. They were constantly, actively searching for people, not just for me, as it was common for weak players to hide from the monsters at night. I pressed my luck, and I was rewarded as I reached the cave without being found. Stepping inside the large cabin, I was relieved to find the room empty, and the large piles of weapons exactly as I remembered them. Perhaps taking my time more than I should have, I looked through all two of the two-handed swords until I found one I considered to be the best. It was maximum length for a two-hander. It was light and simple, without any senseless decorations beyond a thin foam crossguard. Though I knew my major tactics of running and hiding would remain unchanged, I at least felt like I now had the opportunity to fight. Just as I was leaving, the old man appeared from one of the back rooms. My first instinct was to run, but I just slowly turned and left, as normally as if I was just any old monster readying to go out on patrol. A moment passed before he called out to me, but by then I was already sprinting towards the safety of the dark woods, sword in hand. Now it was time to plan. The entire time I had been gathering and prepping. I had been thinking of what exactly it was I wanted to do. There was no point in trying to clear my name, and just surviving until I was caught wasn't really much of a plan. Thinking of what Nephem, my character, would do in this situation, I realized that I didn't really have that much of a choice to get I didn't really have the choice to get out of the land, especially if you took the real-world consideration that Hardul had been the one to drive us here. I then simply asked what it was that I wanted to do. I really wanted to kill that fat woman warrior, Archduke Ulsik. I really wanted to kill that fat woman warrior. This is the person who broke roleplay to get that bounty placed on him in the first place. Archduke Ulsik also really deserved to die. In fact, I wanted to see just about every player who had sided with Ulsik in hunting me suffer a bit. But I was more than willing to just watch the noble house of Ulsik crumble. Fantasizing about seeing everyone and their precious characters killed, I quickly realized that difficulty, if not impossibility, of me being able to accomplish something like that. Setting my sights low, I decided it would be best to just focus on having the woman warrior get killed while antagonizing the Ulsik house whenever I could. This didn't leave me with much of a time frame. It was already Saturday night. The event only lasted until Sunday afternoon, giving me only a few hours to do anything. Every second now had the utmost importance, especially because I planned never coming back here again. With such a small amount of time to work with, I needed every edge I could get. While just having the sword with me felt comforting, the tiny bit of damage I dealt with it didn't seem like it would accomplish much, or would let me accomplish my goal within the time allotted. And though I was certain I could kill the woman in solo combat, I doubt there would ever be a time when she'd be alone without some manner of backup. Combined with my spells, I might have a chance against two people, though not if one were a mage. Magic in this game was definitely overpowered, and I think I could understand why. Almost every top-tier noble was a wizard, including Ulsik himself. All the most important battles would be fought between mages, and warriors really only served the purpose of standing between the wizards, creating a nice wall for them to cast over. What scared me about the fire mages was the abilities like Ulsik's Firestorm. While dodging beanbags wasn't easy, you still had a chance. With undodgeable area attacks, the only hope that you had was that your character was strong enough to survive. Thankfully, mages typically dressed like poison dart frogs, making it easy to not only see that they were dangerous, but easy to see them from a distance. In order to kill the woman warrior, I'd have to attack her at a time when I could tell there wasn't a mage within running distance, which I doubted would be an easy task. Wondering if there was anything I was overlooking on my character sheet, I fished into my pockets to retrieve it. As I did, my fingers brushed against two things I had completely forgotten about. I had removed the two magical rings from the treasure box and never returned them. This was undoubtedly a cause to celebrate. While made of cheap plastic and set with cheap plastic gems, the real worth of the rings could be determined by a chart that revealed what each type of ring did. Unable to remember the whole chart, or even more than a small part of it, I was at least able to determine that the gold and blue gem ring was undoubtedly powerful, but also that the silver and three red gemmed ring was most likely unique. Unique rings were the ones that were not on the chart, at least not on the chart in the rulebook, meaning that in order to find out what they did, I'd have to ask a plot master. My joy quickly fading, I realized that without knowing what they did, these rings were just cheap pieces of plastic. And even so, I was still glad I had kept them. Slipping them back into my pocket, I began to review my character sheet, only to realize that it was far too dark to make out a single word. Taking a bit of a risk, I moved towards one of the major paths, which had large streetlights placed sparingly upon them. Reading my statistics beneath the light, I found nothing I didn't already know. Even so, it was good to actually see what I could do, and I began to formulate what kind of strategies I had available to me. In a somewhat ironic sense, while I had mused over over how to be tactful and strategic, I was standing out in the open beneath a streetlight. This may have been bad because I was clearly visible and vulnerable, but it was even worse because my eyes were adjusting to the light. As the two monsters approached me, I didn't even notice them until it was too late. They saw me and didn't even change their pace. I called out to them, asking what I saw. One replied that they were murdagrunks, and seeing my confusion, the other simply explained they were stronger grunks. As they walked towards me, their short swords ready, I felt a strange calmness. It felt like a proper, gentlemanly duel rather than an ambush. I felt like we were all on the same wavelength, understanding that what we were about to do was a battle that would test our physical skills and abilities, rather than what our stats dictated. It was to be an honorable, feel-good battle, where no matter who was slain, we'd all congratulate each other on an excellent fight. Just as they leapt to attack me, 3 more of them leapt out of the woods. So much for honorable battle. Cursing, I quickly struck one twice, relying more on the reach of my sword than my actual skill. He fell, making me take the guess that even though they were stronger than ordinary grunks, they were not stronger by much. The other 4 stopped advancing and spread out to surround me. Were the circumstances different, my principal thoughts would be to shout and delay them until help arrived. With that being a more deadly option than trying to face these 4, I decided on a plan that may have been even more foolish. Calling out to one, I challenged him. A direct, clear challenge. The other 3 seemed indifferent, ready to just swarm and kill me, but I had chosen the right one. This guy was tall and fairly muscular, very unlike the rat-like creature he was supposed to be. With a few short words, he told me the other 3 could take me, and with a bit of reluctance, they moved away from the 2 of us. He leapt at me in a way that would not have been allowed to do. He leapt at me in a way that you were not allowed to do at this LARP. Within the rules, combat was expected to be 2 people standing a few feet away from each other, tapping their weapons at each other until the person who was dealt more damage or had more HP won. Jumping at your opponent was not allowed, as it was considered dangerous, and getting too close to a person was likewise prohibited. In that moment, and probably every moment like it, I simply didn't care and was glad someone was willing to actually give me a fight. He had charged in close, but too short for the reach of his sword to He had charged in close, but too short for the reach of his sword yet within the reach of mine. I slashed at him, forcing him to block, and tried a second slash before he leapt back. He was skilled, perhaps even more than I was, but both my weapon and my statistics were superior. As he tried to figure out how he could actually strike me with his short sword, I interrupted his thoughts by rushing in at him. He was far too good with his short sword, blocking every strike I had, but the difference in reach kept him from returning any attacks. Finally, I bent down low, striking his legs with a solid hit, too low for him to block with his sword, and I quickly followed with another, felling him. The other three had remained silent spectators, but as they saw their comrade fall, they began to make odd, rat-like sounds. I turned to face them, ready for them to swarm me. Instead, another one took a step forward, and, with a bit of relief, I challenged him as well. This fight was short, as I likewise discovered he was a skilled fighter and that he could block my attacks with leisure, but 2 strikes to the legs was enough to defeat him. The third didn't even wait for me to properly challenge him, and I didn't even wait to find out if he was good at blocking. I kept attacking his feet, forcing him to leap back each time, unable to counter. As he reached the edge of the path, his foot fell into the small ditch that was beyond it. I struck him squarely on the shoulder and followed it with a hit on the side. The last one approached me in a low stance, and I, at first, thought that he was just acting like the rat-like creature he was supposed to be. It didn't take me long to realize he had figured out the counter to my low attacks, and from his low stance, his short sword guarded his legs with ease. I was also pressed into a different difficulty, in that the one target that I had access to was also the one I wasn't allowed to hit. He didn't even bother to guard his head, in a strange form of faith, and I was left to try and slash his sides, only to have my efforts wasted by his blocks. While his stance was good for defense, he had no real way to attack me. His crouch kept him from being very mobile, and we fought in almost the same position for far too long a length of time. Seeing that he wasn't even breathing hard, I suddenly felt all the exhaustion the last battles owed me. Gasping for breath, I continued to attack, knowing that each passing moment was just to his advantage. The second I'd stop my attack, he'd rush in, dealing damage that I could not risk to take. With a final, wild swing, I gave up. Too tired and too unskilled, I realized I had no chance of beating him in this manner of fighting. As soon as he saw the opportunity, he leapt forward, his sword flashing at my shoulder for 2 points of damage. I responded in kind, however, for 4 points. With no skill, no effort, nothing but raw statistics, I took his next hit and returned it with my own. There was a mutual feeling of disappointment, but I just could not let myself be killed by a bunch of random rat people. As he dropped, I asked if I found any treasure on him. They handed me 5 copper pieces, a fair amount of money, and then left them as they went to respawn somewhere else. The 2 hits I had taken were bad, but I still had at least 10 HP left. A bit low for a warrior to have, but I was quickly realizing that I might just not have what it takes to be a melee fighter. Knowing that I had to rapidly learn the styles of fighting that took place here, or I didn't have a chance at accomplishing my goals, I began to wonder if it was time to start seeking fights. I didn't have to, as it had been all too easy for the fights to find me. Like most nights, that night had a special theme. Every monster that was out there was either a grunk or a murda-grunk, and they were out in full force. The side roads were now just as deadly, if not more so, than the main roads, something that took me a few encounters to determine. Fighting against the people who played the monsters was a rare treat for me, and after taking down 6 two-man groups, I realized I was overextending myself in order to keep fighting them. Keeping to the small roads, I kept fighting and fighting, ambushing one group or being ambushed by another. I went out of my way to pick fights, enraptured by what probably was some form of bloodlust. With each enemy carrying a single copper piece, I had a good way to keep track of how many I had been fighting, as I would have lost count otherwise. I had first pitied enemies for having low HP and dealing only 1 or 2 points of damage. I quickly got over that, as my own HP dwindled, and I saw that that they basically all had infinite lives. I would fight a group only to fight them again for the next few minutes, or within the next few minutes, knowing full well that I would see them again soon. The battles slowly became easier as I began to recognize people and how they fought, and the monsters seemed to slowly get used to the nature of having infinite respawns. As the night continued, they grew less and less defensive, more willing to do suicidal rushes and risky maneuvers, knowing full well that they'd just return in a matter of minutes. As time flew by, I began to wonder what exactly I was doing. With only 6 HP left, I had collected over 50 copper coins, half of a gold piece, but not having accomplished much else. With the large amount of jingling in my pocket, I eventually asked a lone murder-grunk I had ambushed and slew if he had any silver pieces he could exchange for my copper. He asked me how many rat people I had defeated, and I started counting. Amazed, the murder-grunk introduced himself, and then told me that when he wasn't a monster, he'd play a character named Vlaine. Vlaine explained that the cave right now was basically empty, with every monster running about. All right, later, Mango. Thank you for stopping by. I don't know. God, the story just keeps going on and on. Okay. They were actually supposed to be assaulting the inn where all the players were gathered together. However, I had chosen a fairly convenient hunting grounds for the monsters, as I was right in between the inn and the cave, with only a handful ever actually reaching the inn and being killed almost instantly by the high-powered people that guarded it. Most of the rat people were actually preferring to find and fight me than to journey all the way to the inn. Realizing that I was ruining what was most likely Ulsic's planned event, I couldn't help but feel proud. Thanking Vlaine for the information and for exchanging my copper for some silver coins, I made my way back onto the small paths, reinvigorated thanks to having found a purpose. The rat folk changed their tactics. Rather than moving in two people groups, they moved around individually, searching for me. While they could have easily defeated me by just moving around in groups of 4 or more, I think I came to realize that their goal wasn't a collaborative one. Each monster wanted to be the lone one who managed to kill me. This made my life easier, as ambushing them became almost too easy and the subsequent battles were over in seconds. The encounters were now paced closer together, but I grew less tired as the night continued, having found a style of attack that worked almost too well. The legs were my favorite targets. The only way that they could be defended was from the crouch position or by moving backwards. What this meant was that any time that you wanted to move forwards, their legs became perfect targets. I would wait for my opponent to take that step forward to attack with the short dagger or sword, and with a step back of my own, I would strike his exposed legs. With my fading strike working every single time, no matter how often I used it against the same person, I thought about just how frustrated all the monsters must be. They continued to keep to the small paths. They continued to keep to the small paths I was on, a nearly continuous assault of battles. As soon as I dropped one grunk, I could spot another who had heard the sounds of the battle and would rush to meet me. With adrenaline surging through me, I continued to fight, slowly learning how to use my sword until I felt like I really could match the monsters in actual skill, not simply cheap tactics and an abuse of my reach advantage. After exchanging the coins a few times with Vlaine, who told me that the monsters were glad I did so, as they would probably have run out of copper coins, in the 5 hours I spent fighting, I managed to collect 2 gold coins and 3 silver ones. An impressive haul by any standard. But the 5 hours had taken their toll, With no healing spells left, only 3 HP, and I could barely move. Thankfully, it seemed that the monsters too were exhausted, and their numbers slowly dwindled, until finally I was certain that I was all alone in these woods. Trudging back to the cabin that I had commandeered as my own, I opened the door, too exhausted to think. The inside was very dark, far darker than the moonlit night outside, but I didn't want to risk turning on the lights. I moved towards the closet. I moved towards the closet that would be my personal sanctuary, ready to pass out. The lights suddenly flashed on, and I wheeled about, adrenaline knocking aside my fatigue. Standing by the light switch was the young, nervous girl I had met many hours before, startled and surprised by someone she was clearly not expecting. She must have been either sleeping or waiting in bed, as she was dressed in a simple pajamas. With the rules of the game dictating that we were both still active players, I looked at her as a threat. She had no weapons on her, but if she were a pure mage, that would mean nothing. With only 3 HP, a single spell would be more than enough to take me out. Not wanting to take that chance, I moved towards her, sword ready. She surrendered, throwing both hands out wide, showing that she didn't even have a beanbag to throw. She then told me that she didn't have any spells remaining, as she had used them up already. Perhaps somewhat foolishly, I trusted her, telling her to get back to bed. I quickly turned out the lights, and locked the door, only realizing how stupid I was for not noticing that it had been unlocked earlier. She knew who I was. At least, she knew how I was a fugitive murderer with a 30 gold bounty on his head. I told her that all I wanted to do was sleep, and that the closet was the only safe place I had found. I asked if I could trust her not to tell anyone, so that I wouldn't have to kill her. When I said it like that, she told me that there was no doubt that I could trust her. Slumping down in the closet, I waited for my heartbeat to slow, the last bit of excitement having roused it into a rapid tempo. Feeling hungry, I offered her a bag of chips as I opened one myself. As we ate, she asked me what I had been doing for the last day, and I felt the strange need to tell someone of what I had gone through. As soon as I finished, I asked her what she had been doing, and if she had any news that could help me. Her character's name was Selenia, and she had come here with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend, much like Hardul, had been here since the very beginning, and was one of the most powerful warriors. He had convinced her to come, though she had admitted she was very reluctant. He had built her character for her, telling her that he planned on working with her as a team. She was a mage, but could not use any weapons and had only 7 HP. All of her points had been spent in healing spells. He had made her into a pocket mage. Great. These 2 words may not mean much to non-LARPers, because it may have been something that can only exist in a LARP. While a warrior may be powerful, there was a way that they could be practically invincible. While they fought, they would have a mage with a hand on their back, constantly healing them. And this 2-person combo was so effective, it ended up being the sole tactic used by the most powerful players in the last LARP I had gone to. Fighting against a warrior who had a pocket mage was at best like chopping at a tree, trying to get the mage to expend their all their spells, so you actually had a chance to do damage to the warrior themselves. She had followed her boyfriend around all day, healing him and the other when necessary, until it came to the big battle that had taken place at the inn. He had underestimated the Grunk swarm, running into the center of one, and ended up having Selenia use all of her healing spells. Without her spells, she was effectively useless, and opted to go to their cabin. Her boyfriend also wanted to leave with her, but Ulsa kept saying there were more ratfolk, or that more ratfolk were on their way. Since he had to help defend the inn from a massive swarm that would never actually reach it, the boyfriend had stayed behind. Reaching into my pocket to take out a piece of gold so that I could give her something in exchange for for her silence besides a threat, I realized I still had the 2 rings. I quickly asked her if there was a rule book inside this cabin, and she went over to her boyfriend's bags and pulled out a copy. Reading with a flashlight, I found the page with the ring chart, and sorry, I found the page with the ring chart, was impressed by what I had. The gold ring was the blue with the blue gem was a ring of minor spell reflection. What this meant was that I could block spells with my sword. Ordinarily, one of the reasons why mages were so powerful was because both the shield and the weapon of a warrior were viable targets for their spells, forcing them to dodge if they wanted to avoid the spell with the sword and shield. With the sword and shield being the most popular weapon combo, the shield served mostly as a giant target for spellcasters. However, with either a sword, shield, or ring of minor spell reflection, neither the sword nor shield counted as targets, meaning you could block spells that came towards you. A major ring of spell reflection actually let you bounce back any spell you blocked back at its caster 3 times a day, but the minor ring was still much more powerful than someone like me deserved. I also determined that the ring with 3 red gemmed was in fact a unique one, which was at least better than not being sure about it. Placing both rings on my finger, I thanked Selenia, gave her the gold piece, and explained that I was using it to buy her silence, then dug into my small closet nest. An hour later, her boyfriend marched inside, waking me from my light sleep. He seemed rather angry, and I quickly learned why. He and the rest of the nobles had been staying at the inn, waiting for an ambush they were expecting to come, but only a handful of ratfolk ever made their way to the inn in the first initial wave. Ulsik eventually ended up breaking character, calling the cave, finding out that the monsters were too tired to go and attack the inn. All the players who had stayed up all night at the inn were furious, having been denied what was supposed to be a fun and easy battle. Selenia explained that it had been me that had been fighting hundreds of ratfolk, and he quickly demanded to know how she knew. She explained that one of the monsters who was going back to the cabin had told her what had happened, and her boyfriend ranted and raved for a little longer before he collapsed into the bed. I returned to sleep, but with the urgency that comes from understanding that I only had the rest of the day to complete my goals. I woke up after only another 3 hours of sleep. If my guess was correct, most of the players were still sleeping at the time, especially since they practically spent the entire night guarding the inn. After eating a pathetic breakfast, I looked out of the closet in the cabin. Selenia and her boyfriend were sleeping, in what I noticed were separate beds. Looking at the gear her boyfriend had carelessly tossed to the ground, including a clearly magical 2-handed sword, I wished vehemently that I didn't need a sanctioned witness in order to steal things. Just as I was about to leave the cabin, a dirty little rule suddenly entered my mind. With the rulebook within reach, I went ahead and made sure I had read it correctly. I read it again to make sure that I had not omitted anything. I then struggled slightly with my decision. Available to all players was the ability to deliver a finishing blow to a fallen enemy. Dropping a monster or a player to 0 HP meant that it had only fallen unconscious, and that it would still take the 15 minutes for it to die. However, by delivering a coup de grace... Oh, hello. Hello, Nasrallah. Welcome to Story Night. Also, everyone who is joining, we are currently raising money for a charity, which is the reason I'm streaming today. Usually I don't stream on Wednesdays. And if you are at all interested in helping out with that, feel free to donate. We're trying to hit 5,000. That is across multiple streamers, not just me. But I'm hoping that we can get up to 1,000 for just me. I've been hitting 1,000 on all my charity streams before now, so we will see. Hello, Nuz. How are you doing? Let me give you a shout out. Was this story about Finn Balor? I don't think so. The story's name is just Wizard LARP. It's submitted by one of my readers, or one of my viewers. What is Finn Balor? Dark Souls 3. I figured. Still doing the Deathless runs? Oh, yeah, it's also a D&D, or Dungeons and Dragons move. Coup de grace just means anything like a finishing move on a downed opponent. So, how is everyone? Welcome to Story Night. Oh, wow. Okay, I wasn't expecting that. That was a surprise. That was actually a really big surprise. Thank you for the follow, Bruce. I usually do stories. I also do Dungeons and Dragons sometimes, and a lot of CRPGs. So stuff like Baldur's Gate, Pillars of Eternity, Disco Elysium, all of that. So if anyone here, anyone that joined us during the raid is interested in those, feel free to give a follow, and you might actually see some of that later on. We also have a deceptively advanced bot, as I keep updating it. Actually, a whole bunch of new updates went through today. Tonight was a bit rough. Good start, bad finish. Oh, that sucks. Did you at least get past Vort? On D&D, your character is a murder robot who found God. Are you playing as a... Oh, God, what are they called? Warforged. Ah, yeah, I haven't played D&D since 3.5, so a lot of the new races are really interesting to me. There's so many races now. I just remember the old starter pack that we had in 3.5, and now it's just like you can be every mix of colorations. Also turtles. I actually do want to try a turtle. Mostly because turtles sound hilarious. They're like the Igways of D&D. You're a cleric. Clerics are the best class, and no one will ever change my mind about that. Like, I love my spellcasters, but clerics are still the best of all classes. All right. So we are halfway through Wizard LARP. If anyone is interested in catching up, I am about... How far down? Okay, I'm about 3/4 of a way down the second column of this. We are... Oops, that's not right. That's not right at all. Don't... Damn it. I tried to link something. Okay. What I just linked was the wrong something. That. We are about 3/4 of the way down the second column of this. If anyone wants to read along. The recap of this story so far is that we have a player character who has been accused of disrupting the gold economy in a LARP, and as such has had a bounty placed on his head after escaping from jail. He has spent the entire night just fighting an entire swarm of ratmen because he's pretty physically fit. So, in a LARP, you can actually do that. So he spent pretty much 5 hours just fighting an entire swarm of ratmen in the forest that were supposed to be attacking an inn. And then he ended up just finding one of the supposedly unused cabins and just crashing there all night. He still has a couple of magic rings, one of which he just discovered is a minor ring of spell reflection, which is really good. And he's a level 1 character, so he doesn't have that much of a chance, but he's trying to find a way to get back at the person who accused him of the whole disrupting the economy thing, which should not be a valid... Like that's not a valid reason to put someone to place a bounty on someone in a LARP. It's so dumb. The noble that he's trying to get back at is named Ulsik, and Ulsik is corrupt as all hell. Also a very powerful mage, and he wants to find a way to kill him. All right, later second coming, thank you for stopping by. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and continue where we were. Let's see. So right now he's currently considering whether he should be able to kill one of the sleeping characters using a coup de grace and take his sword because he's using the warrior is using a two-handed magical sword, and his character is also using two-handed swords, and a two-handed magical one would be a massive upgrade for him. All right. Let's see. Available to all players was the ability to deliver a finishing blow to a fallen enemy. Dropping a monster or player to 0 HP meant that it was only that it had only fallen unconscious, and that it would still make take the 15 minutes for it to die. However, by delivering a coup de grace, a declared attack that you had to wait 5 seconds before you delivered it, you bypassed the whole 15 minutes and just instantly killed your opponent. And the rules made it certain to say that the finishing blow could be used on sleeping people, making it possibly the best way to assassinate someone. I wondered at first if I was betraying Selenia's trust by murdering her boyfriend while he slept, but knowing he was from House Ulsik made my decision very simple. With sword in hand, I declared my attack, counted the 5 seconds out loud, and gently tapped his shoulder. I then gently woke him. He did not wake gently. He knew full well what I had done even before I told him. He threw a fit loud enough to wake Selenia, but I calmly showed him the rules I had followed, and told him that he died in his sleep, not even knowing who had killed him. He had no choice but to accept his character's death, but I knew for certain that when he went back to the inn to get resurrected, he'd tell everyone that I had killed him. I then almost ran right out of the cabin before realizing something very important. I turned to the guy and I told him I was taking his stuff. With him being a fallen enemy, he would act as the witness as I looted his gear. He turned to Selenia, and he knew better than I did that she had no way to stop me. Emptying a pouch that he held over 50 gold and grabbed the two-handed sword. I felt somewhat reluctant about parting with my old sword. I asked him if he wanted to keep the physical weapon, an overly ornate and tacky piece, and he agreed that he'd prefer if I just took the 2 ribbons that told people that his sword was both +3 and made of enchanted silver. Hoping my tiny bit of revenge against the noble house would not backfire on me, and I ran off. Keeping to the smaller paths, I briefly considered going into the other cabins and killing other people while they slept. This plan dissolved rather quickly, as but within the half hour I managed to find 2 people talking at the crossroads. Moving off the path, I listened and discovered that the boyfriend I listened and discovered that the boyfriend had not even waited to tell the people at the inn, but had warned a fellow noble who was now rousing everyone awake. At first, I felt bad that potential victims were now gone, but I realized this was better for me. They'd be weakened by lack of sleep, and more importantly, they'd be active, giving me something to do. Welcome back, Nuz. The two people then parted and ran off in opposite directions, leaving me to figure out a plan. Attaching the 2 ribbons to my sword, I could now deal 7 damage and double damage against creatures weak to silver. Since it was a brand new day, I had my full 14 HP, along with my 1 7 damage fire spell. Oh god, where was I? along with my 1 7 damage fire spell and my 3 4 HP heat spells, or heal spells, I felt ready to take on the world. While feeling pretty good about my newfound and restored power, I spotted Vlaine headed towards the cave. Seeing that he wasn't a monster just yet, I went up to him and asked him what he was doing so early in the morning. Vlaine explained that all the monsters were gathering together in the cave, preparing for a huge battle. Questioning him further, he explained that this battle was somewhat unplanned and was basically being cobbled together because of the last night's big battle didn't go as planned. While the monsters had their share of fun, the players in the inn felt like they had just wasted their time. The funny part was that they couldn't really complain, because in a way I had been defending the inn and would be considered a hero in the game. I explained I definitely would not be seen as a hero, especially since I was just killing a noble this morning. Vlaine found this news very amusing. He and most of the people who played monsters all really hated the nobles, and this was the only good news to them. My gears turning, I asked for more details about the upcoming battle. This time, they wouldn't just be weak rat folk. They were going as various types of giants, including trolls and ogre mages. Vlaine was one of the few monsters who was actually good at casting spells, so he knew that he'd be chosen to play the part of an ogre mage. Since he was a mage, he would probably be put in charge of a small squadron, probably of young monsters. I then told him what I was planning. He stopped me short, telling me that most of the monsters would not agree to doing anything like that, because they knew that a monster's role was not to kill, but be killed. I felt disheartened for a second, before Vlaine also explained that there were definitely a few monsters, if not a few players, who would want nothing more than to help me accomplish my goals. We planned quickly. The huge battle would take a lot of preparation, about 2 hours or so. During that time, Vlaine would talk to some of the younger monsters that he thought would be on my side. He said that was a pretty easy step, since I had managed to get a lot of respect through killing so many ratfolk by myself. After that, he himself would go on patrol, using the freedom of being a monster to look for players. He would then lead them to me. Within an hour, there were 6 teenagers sitting around me inside a wooded glen, asking them a few questions. It became quite clear that they hated the nobles, not just the ones from Ulsik's house. They told me themselves that they had heard I had defended the inn despite being a fugitive, none of them realizing that all I did was stop the nobles from having a chance to show off. Thankfully, whether or not they were trustworthy didn't matter. I explained what I wanted to do. Handing them each a gold piece, I promised them another if things went as planned. Right, he has 50 gold now, doesn't he? I met up with Vlaine 15 minutes before the big battle was supposed to start. He said that everything was ready. He even said that he had gone one step further than we had planned and managed to convince a particular person to join us. It was the guy who had been forced to resort to relying on statistical advantage in order to defeat. After that first battle, when we had figured out how to use the low stance to counter my attacks, I received the chance to fight him several more times. He was easily one of the most skilled fighters that was there, and it was only towards the end of that night that I felt that I had grown to be able to fight him purely with skill. Even by then, though, I felt that we had been outfitted with the same weapon, or that if we had been outfitted with the same weapon, I would have lost each time. Vlaine then explained that that man was going to be playing a summoned air elemental, a creature that could walk right past a shield wall just by saying that he was flying. This meant that the battle would very quickly turn into the perfect situation for me. As he ran back to the cave in order to get his costume on, I ran towards the large field where the battle would take place. I moved into the woods that lined the field, preparing a makeshift blind to conceal my position. What I needed to do now was just watch and wait until the perfect moment presented itself. The two armies soon gathered at opposite ends of the field. The giants were organized in loose squads and were clearly outnumbered, almost 2 to 1. However, that was only in reality, while in the fantasy world there were more giants than there were players. When a giant would fall, he would go to the edge of the woods, wait a few seconds, and then come back as a new giant. Typically, they had a set number of times they could respawn, depending on how strong of a giant they were, with weaker giants respawning more times than stronger giants. However, the number would likely change as the battle went on, as the old man, the battle coordinator, would see how many mages still could cast spells on the player's side. If there were only a handful of mages left, the coordinator would just tell the monsters to stop respawning, and the battle would soon be over. Everything was geared in the player's favor, and there was absolutely no chance that they would lose. The players were organized by noble house. Those who were not part of a noble house were conscripted into one for the duration of the battle. Their strategy was simple. The warriors would form a shield wall, with the mages behind them as a support. A few of the noble warriors were already in the front lines, with pocket mages already behind them. They would just let the waves of giants crash onto the shield lines, which were undoubtedly holding the which would undoubtedly hold. The strong warriors would never fall because of their pocket mages, while the weaker warriors would just get replaced as they fell. Everything about the battle seemed to have already been decided. I spotted Ulsik safely in the back, with a large entourage. Among them, I spotted Hardul, Lith, and even Selenia and her newly resurrected boyfriend. Knowing that they could turn into a very complicated situation, I hoped that the battle would press the entourage to spread out. As the battle began, the air quickly filled with shouts. The nobles shouted orders at the other players, while the giants simply shouted. I watched intently, seeing the players shift around, until I saw what I was looking for. 6 players, with shields forming a line, were directly in front of Vlaine's squad of giants. Oh, God. I stood up and walked out of the forest behind the players' forces. Vlaine, who had been fighting lazily, spotted me with a great shout, lifted his staff into the air with both hands. Responding to the signal, the 6 players moved out and to the sides, forming a massive gap directly in the center of the shield wall formation. Ignoring those 6, Vlaine and his squad marched right past the shield wall, striking down mage after mage. It all happened in an instant. The scripted battle, with all its foretold conclusions, turned into an absolute chaos. The players tried at first to close the gap, but the other monsters knew an advantage when they saw one. They poured into the gap, striking the almost completely defenseless mages. Dropping one after the other, with no healer support, the front line began to crumble and a complete rout seemed likely. That was until Ulsik and the other nobles decided to step up. With a single spell, Ulsik obliterated Vlaine's entire squadron, stopping the spearhead formation that had managed to create such a large gap. As he continued to throw spells with abandon, the other nobles began activating their special abilities. Some became invincible, others exploded in damage, and one managed to revive 10 of the mages who had fallen. The battle quickly turned against the giants, who were pressing back until the shield wall reformed itself. I watched all this with anticipation. No one seemed to notice me, or at least they didn't seem to care about me. No one except Lith. As soon as he spotted me, he knew my intentions. He moved towards me, away from Ulsik, and confronted me. There was no point in words. This wasn't a matter that concerned House Ulsik or the game. All that mattered was that this was a rematch, a moment for Lith to restore his lost honor. As he moved towards me, I threw an ice spell at him, hoping to pin his legs. Without flinching, he simply replied, "Minor immunity," and continued forward. This was fine by me. Being immune to all low-level spells, which were all of my spells, made this into a straight sword fight. The only thing that irked me was that it was most likely Ulsik that had cast it on Lith, but even that meant one less spell Ulsik could cast today. We were a bit of a distance away from the rest of the battle, and while I desperately needed to pay attention to it, I couldn't afford to. Lith was earnestly trying to kill me, and this time I was ready to respond in kind. He had not been through what I had been through. His sword was slow in comparison to the daggers I had faced, and his shield seemed to trouble him more than me. My sword sang, slicing through the air and then into his leg, and again into his shoulder. He was shocked when he heard me call out 7 damage, and now he was at best 2 hits away from dying. He didn't say a word, though, and charged forward, slamming me with his shield. I fell back, not expecting the illegal strike, but complimenting him on his willingness to use it. He wasn't holding anything back, and I was glad he had decided to take this so seriously. As he tried to slam his shield into me, I used all of my strength to whip my sword into his, disarming him and tossing his sword away. I followed the blow with a light tap to his shoulder before letting him pick up his sword. 3 times 7 was 21. While he had only started with 22 HP. With his single HP left, I decided to remind him of our earlier battle by telling him to run off to the inn to find a healer. These might have been some kind of magic words. As soon as I said them, he shouted, threw down his shield, and leapt at me with his sword, leaving his front leg exposed. With a perfect fading strike, I dealt the 7 damage to his leg before stepping out of the way of his blow that was assuredly aimed at my head. As soon as I delivered the damage, he just smiled. "That was a good fight," he said simply, before dropping ceremoniously to the ground. Moving past him, I saw that our fight had not gone unnoticed. Selenia, attached to her boyfriend, was heading my way. This was not a fight I wanted to deal with, especially not when I was supposed to be paying attention to the bigger battle. But the boyfriend was not going to let his assassin just walk away. He came swinging, and I wondered how he had survived in this game. He swung his 2-handed sword as if the sword was swinging him. Realizing that he was the first player I was going to fight, after going through all the monsters and even Lith, I didn't feel as much joy as I did a sense of tedium. I struck him again and again and again, wondering how he was supposed to hit me. He was calling out 12 points of damage with each strike, but I was not worried in the slightest. After hitting him 10 times, he called Selenia to come heal him. As she did, I asked if she could save a heal spell for Lith, or could save a heal spell to heal Lith. As she agreed, her boyfriend grew furious, which made his attacks all the wilder. Ignoring every roll, he seemed intent on chopping off my head with his silly-looking sword. I kept attacking him until I had hit him another 10 times. After Selenia healed him again, she ran off towards Lith, leaving the 2 of us alone. Without restraint, I whipped my sword into him, literally shifting him left and right with each blow, until he simply dropped. Picking up his sword and seeing no ribbons on it, I just tossed it away from him, to give him a little trouble if someone decided to revive him, but not wanting to use a finishing blow on him to kill him outright. As I surveyed the battle, it seemed like the player's shield was... As I surveyed the battle, it seemed like the player's shield wall was doing its job, and the giants were in a bad situation. Spotting Vlaine, I waved my sword at him. With another shout and a raise of his staff, the shield wall once again parted, and chaos returned. Looking on in satisfaction, I turned to look at Ulsik, who now had a worried look on his face. As I stood there, basking in his moment of despair, I was struck hard in the back of my head for 12 points of damage. Turning around, I saw the boyfriend standing there, and I looked around for any signs of a healer. With none that could be found, I realized what he had done. He had dropped to the ground while he still had HP left, only pretending to have fallen. Thanks to the naivety that allowed me to fall for such a simple trick, I only had 2 HP left. I don't think I really cared all that much about how much HP I had at the moment. With the back of my head throbbing slightly, I struck him hard in the hands, not even bothering to call out damage. As his sword dropped slightly, I began to rain down hits on his shoulders. He dropped after only 4, but I continued to poke his body until I was sure he had taken over 300 points of damage to make sure that he wasn't faking this time. I then performed a coup de grace and watched as he stood up and ran off the battlefield. I looked around. I saw that everyone was preoccupied with the giants. The hole in the shield wall was no longer closing. It was hard to tell if there were any mages left standing besides the strongest of the nobles. Looking back towards Ulsik, I saw Hardul standing close to him now, fending off trolls with fire spells. Finally, I saw what I'd been looking for. Ulsik made a very specific motion. A sideways chop that he continued to do until the old man in charge of the monsters began to move around to issue new orders. Ulsik was low on spells. As soon as the signal was sent out, I sent an identical one at Blaine. Rather than raising his staff with both arms, he raised it high with one and shouted, calling forth the air elemental. Even when dressed and acting like a rat person, he had been intimidating. Now, dressed in a tattered gray cloak, dark gray makeup, and a grizzled gray wig, carrying 2 huge foam sickles, his appearance was more than enough to drain what little hope the players had. The air elemental ripped people apart, carving a line through the players that had been dropped before Sorry. Let me try that again. The air elemental ripped people apart, carving a fine... Oh god, it looks like fine, but it's line. A line through the players as they dropped before his sickles. The nobles panicked. The warriors had long lost their pocket mages and were relying on their own HP. The mages had used all their most powerful spells and were using up their items as they actually feared for their lives. Ulsik, though looking somewhat stressed, appeared to be capable of flinging spell after spell, dropping down giants. Finally, as the air elemental drew near him, he called out a death spell, slaying the elemental instantly. With that, he stopped casting. I moved forward, knowing that now was my chance. Using my 3 healing spells, I returned to 14 HP. I looked to see what was left of House Ulsik, and was pleased that only Hardul and Ulsik himself had not fled back to the inn and were lying face down in the grass. The other noble houses were preoccupied with the remaining giants, leaving me and them apart from the rest of the battle. As Ulsik spotted me, his tiny eyes grew wide. Looking at my hands, he pointed to the shouting. Wait, what? Okay. Looking at my hands, he pointed to me, shouting, "The ring! He has the ring of wish!" Looking down at my finger, at the piece of cheap plastic I had completely forgotten about, I realized why he had placed such a large bounty on my head. Ulsik probably didn't care in the slightest about me being free. What he cared about was the unique ring that I'd taken from the chest, and if he cared about it that much, my only guess was that it was obscenely powerful. Putting that matter aside, Hardul stepped in between us. Throwing his 10 damage spell at me, I blocked it easily with my sword. He looked at me strangely at first, until I showed him the other ring I had. He continued to throw spells at me, forcing me to dodge and block with a precision I did not expect from him. Though I tried to get close to him, he kept forcing me back with a nearly endless amount of spells. As I tried to follow his eyes, I suddenly saw him glance behind me. Turning around slightly to see, I saw Lith, his sword ready. Sandwiched between my 2 friends, my truest goal was just beyond them. I realized everything was for nothing. As Lith attacked me, Hardul threw spells at my back, forcing me to dodge and roll just to stay alive. Finally, As Lith managed to catch my sword between his sword and shield, Hardul hit me with a spell for 10 damage. Even so, I knew that if I could just drop Lith, I still had a chance. Ulsik stole that chance from me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him throw a beanbag at me. Instinctively, reflexively, without a single thought in my head, I batted at it with my sword. As it connected with it, I could only scream with rage when I realized what that terrible, horrible man had cast. Shatter. It dropped my no longer existent sword, the sword that had brought me all this way, just as Lith swung at me for 4 damage. I dropped, slowly, painfully, wondering if they would just let me bleed dry, or if they'd finish me off. My face in the dirt, I could feel tears welling up, knowing that I had been so close, yet I couldn't even hit Ulsik once. Ulsik was hysterical. He ran up to Lith and Hardul, hugging them and complimenting himself on his brilliant final spell. He laughed at me, telling me that I had been foolish to oppose him, and that he had saved that spell just for someone like me. He promised both Hardul and Lith peerage, even joking that after this battle, there'd probably be a lot of vacancies. Hardul, overjoyed, asked Ulsik if it had really been his final spell that had been there. Sorry, this is so long. Oh, we're almost done. Where was I? Hardul, overjoyed, asked Ulsik if it had really been his final spell that had finished me off. Ulsik laughed, saying that he was bone dry out of magic, and was right now nothing more than a walking sack of HP. What luck, he said, that it had been his last spell that had taken me down. With the truest ring of happiness in his voice, Hardul said he had waited 7 years for this. Hardul often made bad decisions. That's who he was. Left to his own devices, he will almost always come up with the absolute worst ideas. And, thinking reasonably, logically, this probably was his worst one. The old man in charge of the monsters ran over. Looking down at our feet, he asked how much time had passed. Lith, with sudden realization, bent down and began the coup de grace procedure, as normally as if he was bending down to tie his shoe. The old man just stared in shock before he noticed the ring on my finger. Ignoring the pretend murder happening right in front of him, he gasped as he asked what I was doing with the Ring of Wish. I told him how I came across it, and then asked him what it did. He said it was one of the most powerful items in the game, with the power to grant its bearer a single wish. I knew what my heart desired, or at least what my character's heart desired. I doubt anyone in the circle, omitting Ulsik, would have stopped me. I guess the one good thing about the people that were... Sorry. Let me try that again. I guess the one good thing about people that were easy to hate was that you were rarely alone in hating them. I asked the old man if I could wish someone's character to be dead forever. The old man laughed, saying that there was no need, as characters could only die a certain amount of times that decreased each level, and Ulsik was the highest level character in this game. With a bit of disappointment, I removed the ring, tossed it to Hardul, and went off to find back into the woods to be a fugitive. A little while later, it was time for the event to end. Ulsik, who was supposed to preside over the closing ceremonies. A little while later, it was time for the event to end. Ulsik, who was supposed to preside over the closing ceremonies, could not be found. Instead, the old man told us what an amazing event it was, and how the players had just barely managed to turn back the most fearsome horde to ever attack solemnly. Solemnly, he then began to to list the people who had died permanently, sacrificing themselves for the good of all. 14 people, an astonishing amount, had permanently died. 12 had been nobles, and 6 of them had been from House Ulsik, leaving only 1 alive. With a grave tone, he also said that Archduke Ulsik had mysteriously been killed by assassins, though everyone shot a glance at our table. After a moment of silence, he continued with the ceremony. After everything was cleaned up and packed into the cars, we chatted with some of the people before we left. Very few approved of what had been done. But that was more than fine, since it helped us know which people were miserable and which ones weren't. Vlaine said that he really hoped to see us here again, or perhaps we could start a tabletop campaign. The guy who had been the air elemental was also fairly cool, saying he really wanted to fight against me again. Every teenager there thought that we were the 3 coolest guys they would ever meet, and all of them wanted to be part of the newly formed House Cerberus. Selenia seemed interested in joining in on Blaine's tabletop campaign, and we managed to exchange email addresses before her boyfriend, whose character could never be resurrected, grumpily dragged her away, berating her for hanging out with these regicidal maniacs. Ulsik, or the man formerly known as Ulsik, when he finally reappeared, tried to smile and laugh and accept his death in a noble fashion, but our grins were almost too much for him to take. He ended up finding consolement in the fat warrior woman, who I had completely forgotten about until I heard her name in the list of people who had died. She looked at me with absolute disgust, and I relished her revilement. As we drove home, Hardol explained that he had always hated Ulsik, and half the reason he wanted to be a noble was so that he could eventually kill the man. I half believed him, but was more willing to believe that he just wouldn't. Bleh. I half believed him, but was more willing to believe that he just had a "wouldn't it be awesome" thought and ran with it. Lith was glad Hardol had wished to start a noble house, and was more than happy to remind me that he had been one of the ones that had dropped me in our third and final battle. They then asked me my story, which took the entire rest of the car ride to tell. I don't know if I'll ever go back. More importantly than not, Ulsik would use every bit of his power to just try to ruin my day if I ever returned. But I would be lying if I didn't say I had fun. And while there had been more than a few bad times than the good, I was still glad I had gone. Maybe it was the other two, or if the other two decided to go, I'll tag along. Okay, that was so long. Oh, I don't even know how many people. Holy shit. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed that. That was Wizard LARP. I would say the author, but the author is anonymous, so I actually can't say. I'm going to take a break after that. I need a glass of water, and we need to figure out what I'm going through next, because we have quite a few more stories to go through. Oh. So we're going to take a brief break. I will be back in, say, 15 minutes when I have some water and maybe a little bit of food. All right. Is everyone ready? Jesus, I think this is the biggest group that we've ever had for a story night. Just straight up. I can't believe so many people have stuck around for this. All right. Now, let's see about this thing that you've tricked me into reading. All right. Oh God, I forgot to add the author's name. I'm sorry, Dr. Blackjack. This is Howdy from Hell by Dr. Blackjack. Usually, I add the author's name into the story before I roll it. I forgot to do this time. We love story time and supporting friends. Well, I appreciate having all of you here too. Before we start, I might as well take this opportunity to also plug the charity once more, because we are currently raising money for the Rainforest Trust. The Dark Forest is very environmentally friendly. Without the environment, or without the forests of the world, the Dark Forest itself would not exist. So let's say that there's a bit of a vested interest in keeping what we have left alive. If any of you have any interest at all in donating a little bit towards charity, we are currently running a fundraiser for it. I'm hoping to hit 1,000 just on my own, but our group goal is 5,000. And as you can see, we are a ways off from that. I'm not dissuaded, though. We can keep working on it. Anyway, so this is Howdy from Hell by Dr. Blackjack 21. Vivian found herself in quite a dilemma. Even her best demon couldn't break this subject. His resilience was apparently more than anyone in her department could handle. When she asked Volgaff what was so difficult about this one, he looked confused and ashamed as he shrugged. I don't know, boss. He's just so weird. It gets to you after a while. Well, enough was enough. How did the human saying go? If you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. She fixed her best, I've tortured so many people I find your attempt at bravado boring, expression in place, and marched into the cell. Suspended by his wrist to the opposite wall was the subject. His current physical manifestation had only been around for long enough for it to grow the shadow of a beard. As was the standard procedure, he was primarily naked to make him feel ashamed and vulnerable. His physique was nothing special, even by human standards. His muscles were underdeveloped, and he had a bit of a belly to him, but nothing else noteworthy stuck out. Right now, the subject was still intact since, in his frustration, Volgaff had apparently atomized the subject's last body, and this one was newly issued, all of its musculature and nerves intact. And this should have been just another victim in an endless sea of victims Vivian had tormented, but something was off. This one was smiling. Vivian kept her face carefully neutral as he attempted to wave with one of his manacled hands, while grinning. Well, howdy! You're a new face around here. What happened to old Volgaff? Last I remembered, he was saying it was time for someone else dealt with me. I'm guessing that someone is you. The deviless stared at him a moment, trying to understand what was happening, before she responded. You do know I'm here to torture you, right? The subject nodded. Yep, and we'll get to that shortly, I'm sure. But you're just doing your job, and that's no reason to spoil a perfectly delightful conversation before that. He looked thoughtful a moment before his expression changed to some sort of confusion or consternation. No, but where are my manners? Name's Alan Smith. Nice to meet you, Miss... Vivian sneered. You may call me Mistress Vivian. I've broken the spirits of countless souls in hell, and soon you will be no different. Alan smiled and nodded, his head bobbing up and down in a congenial way that infuriated Vivian. Oh, I'm sure of it. No doubt about it. As soon as you walked in, I said to myself, now there's a woman who knows her business. You're in for it this time, Alan. He looked thoughtful a moment before his expression turned apologetic. But I'm afraid, Mistress Vivian, I'm just too much of a mouthful for little old me. Sorry. Use a Souther accent for Alan? I think that's as south as I could go. I'm glad I got a good guess, though, on the correct accent. Oh, okay. Southern. Gotcha. Where was I? But I'm afraid Mistress Vivian is too much of a mouthful for little old me, so I'll just call you Vivian and you can call me Alan. And I'm pretty sure before we have done here, we're going to be on pretty close terms after that. No reason to let a bit of stuffy formality get between us. Vivian's face contorted in rage at his audacity. Before I'm through with you, you'll be begging for the privilege of calling me whatever I tell you to. I will visit torments on you unlike anything you've ever dreamed of. So consider this your first actual day in hell, and pray that it's your last. Alan nodded with that same infuriating grin on his face. Oh yeah, no doubt. For the record, if you're anywhere near as good as the rest, I'm sure I'm in for a real rough time here shortly. I'd like to apologize ahead of time for any insults I might throw your way, especially anything about your sexual preferences or heritage. That'll just be the pain talking, and I hope you won't take any of it to heart. Eventually, I'll just end up screaming incoherently before I die again. I just want you to know I realize you're doing your job, and I don't actually hold a grudge. You and me, we're good. Vivian laughed cruelly. Oh, it's not just a job. I happen to enjoy tormenting pathetic little souls like yourself. Alan shrugged, his grin never wavering. Oh, of course you do. You have done this, you have to do this all day, every day, forever. If you didn't like doing it, you'd be miserable. You gotta take pride in your work. And look at you. You're the one you go to when no one else can get the job done. You must be at the top of your field. Vivian preened under the compliment a little before scowling. How is this pathetic little man getting in her head like this? It was time to stop humoring him and get started on what she came to do. Oh God, I looked at chat for a moment and lost my place. Vivian preened under the compliment a little before scowling. How is this pathetic little man getting in her head like that? It was time to stop humoring him and get started on what she came to do. It was time to break him. Well, I suppose we'll find out. I hope you're ready. You're in for a long night. Apparently, the man refused to be cowed. He continued to grin and nod. Yeah, I suppose it's about that time. Let's see what someone at the top of their field can do. Weirdly, I'm kind of looking forward to this. Vivian approached the room once again. Oh, time skip. Vivian approached the room once again. She'd done it. She'd finally broken that strange little man. It had taken days, but she'd finally seen the hope leave his eyes as he'd finally slumped in defeat. So why did she feel so unfulfilled as she approached the room to his cell once more? Usually, after breaking a particularly difficult soul, she'd been filled with pride and swagger, but this time she felt like she'd lost something in her victory, and she couldn't figure out what. Still, she had a job to do, So she straightened her back, put her best scowl of annoyance on her face, and opened the door. There was the pitiful human. Alan was his name. She could see the hopelessness in his eyes as his gaze met hers. He took a breath, probably to scream, cry, or beg for mercy. It wouldn't matter, though. There was no mercy or relief to be found here. She was almost a little sad to hear the waver in his voice. Hiya! Welcome back. Vivian blinked stupidly for a moment. She's obviously misheard. I'm sorry, what? Alan nodded as if he'd been expecting that response. That stupid grin wavering for the first time since Vivian had seen, replaced by an apologetic look? Yeah, sorry about yesterday. I admit the pain really got me there, but there's no excuse for everything I said, especially the parts about your mother. I'm sure she's a lovely demon. Still, what I said was uncalled for, so please accept my apology. Vivian could not believe her ears. After everything she'd said and done to him the last couple of days, this Alan was apologizing to her? True, some of his insults had been more imaginative than usual, especially those where he described a series of acts that Vivian was confident was physically impossible for the participants involved. But after a few centuries, the insults of victims spewed as they were suffering just became background noise, something to be forgotten or ignored. Before she realized what she was doing, Vivian responded, yeah, don't worry about it. All's forgiven. Alan's smile returned, more dazzling than before. Thank you so much. I was worried I went too far with some of those. Although, in my defense, you were even better than I'd expected. Still, there's no excuse. The shackled man gave his best shrug. Well, best leave that stuff behind us. Today's a new day. I've got me a new body, and I'm with the most beautiful demon in all of hell. So, tell me, how's your day going? Vivian blinked rapidly. This was all probably just some stalling tactic to buy himself more time. You know nothing you say or do is going to save you, right? You're in hell. There's no escape. I will torment you as long as it takes to leave your soul broken and empty. Alan nodded in that same stupid, empty-headed way of his. Oh, yeah, for sure. But that's no reason to be rude, eh? Well, we'll get there when we get there. But this here is the best part. We get to chat for a little before you get to work, and I get to enjoy your company. No reason to let what's coming ruin the here and now. Vivian laughed with only a slightly hysterical edge. Vivian laughed with only a slightly hysterical edge behind the sound. Did I hear you right? Eternal punishment and suffering is no reason to ruin a few minutes of chatter before the torment begins for the day. I can't figure out if you're insane or just plain stupid. Alan's face had a serene expression on it as he nodded in agreement once more. Was he capable of any other head movement? Well, I suspect it's a little of column A and a little of column B. You know, I've been here a little over 1,000 years already. At first, I hated y'all and everything you did, but then one day my demon came in and I just started going on about how bad his week was going. He complained about how overworked he was and how stressful his job was. All I could do was shrug and answer sarcastically. Tell me about it. And he did. He spent the better part of the day just going on about how bad his day was to the guy he was supposed to torment as soon as he was done. Vivian looked nonplussed. And let me guess, you realize we are just like you, and right then and there decided to have a brighter outlook on life? For once, Alan shook his head no. Hell no! I couldn't believe that idiot would think I'd be sympathetic at all. He tormented me for decades before this. Why would I care about his problems? But, like you thought a bit ago, I realized this could buy me a few precious moments before he started tormenting me again, so I played along. This went on for years. He'd come in and I'd lend a sympathetic ear. As a bonus, I got to catch up on all the gossip in hell. Apparently, Beelzebub had a thing going with a succubus who worked the pits of flame all the time. And there was a question about whether her kid was his or a mortal's. It was hot news, let me tell you. Vivian remembered that bit of drama. It had caused some significant waves in hell back then, but had been but that had been at least a few centuries ago. Alan continued, "Well, anyway, this went on for a while. Years, decades, maybe even a century. I couldn't tell you exactly when, but somewhere along the line I realized I was genuinely enjoying our little chats. Probably that stocking shelf syndrome I'd heard so much about back on Earth. Anyway, sooner or later the brass caught on and realized I wasn't as tormented as I should have been and sent in a new demon. Took me a while to win that one over, but a sympathetic ear is a hard thing to resist forever, and sooner or later she gave in too. Since then, I've been bounced around from one demon to another, and then one department to another. That's what brings us together here." Vivian couldn't believe her ears. Either the human was insane or she was. He'd already been broken at one point and then simply gotten better? Because of office gossip? She shook her head. Okay, whatever. The inane drivel stops here. It's time for me to get to work. Alan went right back to nodding, with that infuriating, apologetic look on his face. "Fair enough. I suppose I chatted your ear off a bit there. For the record, despite what I'm probably about to say, I would never actually judge you based on your sexual preferences, whatever you are. They got a right to pursue happiness however you choose. And I wish you luck with that. Now, let's get started." Vivian was exhausted. It had been a long day. She'd been torturing this odd little human who demanded over and over to speak with the manager of hell. She'd broken the human's spirit, eventually, but it had taken longer than anyone short of that idiot Alan. Right now, all Vivian wanted to do was sit back and relax after a long day. After all, she'd earned it. As she walked into her residence, Vivian was met with the delicious aroma of dinner. Then, as she set down her case files, she was greeted with the now familiar, "Well, howdy!" Alan poked his head out from around the kitchen doorway. "Oof, you look rough. Long day?" Vivian nodded exhaustedly. Yeah, I had a real alpha. Sorry, let me try that again. Yeah, I had a real alpha Karen today. Took a lot longer to break than usual. I actually had to fall back on the flaming clown spiders. Alan shook his head in disgust. "Oh, yeah, I remember those. A real nightmare fuel, that. Well, anyway, never mind. Why don't you come in here and take a load off and tell me all about it? I got some chicken fried steak cooking up, and dinner'll be ready in no time." Vivian leaned in and gave Alan a quick peck on the cheek. "You're sweet. Tell me, how was your day?" Alan handed her a glass of something called sweet tea, and then got back to working the mysteries of the kitchen he'd insisted they installed when he moved in. "Oh, same old, you know. Narlac the Ever-Burning hasn't had a proper pedicure for those hooves of his in over a century, so I cleaned them up right quick while we went over his torment regimen. Just like those horses back home. And don't tell him I said that. Anyway, I found a few weak spots in his torment, and I bet he'll see a 10% increase in efficiency for breaking bank managers from here on out." Vivian nodded while sipping her drink. "Excellent. I hear the new intern is in charge of your torment next week." Unfortunately, he's a bit overeager and keeps atomizing his victims before they can break. Alan grinned. Well, as hell's first official torment auditor, I'll see if we can straighten him out right quick. Oh, if you can remember, could you pick me up some sweet potatoes tomorrow after work? I got another recipe that'll knock your socks off. He looks at Vivian's cloven hooves pointedly for a moment. Figuratively speaking. This is a really good one. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for the opportunity to do a reading on this, Dr. Blackjack. Just so you know, I kind of consider narration to be sort of the ultimate test in how well written certain stories are. The more mistakes that I make, usually the more I'm surprised by the more I'm surprised by the prose. Less mistakes, in my opinion, means a better experience for both the reader and the writer. So I'm guessing, did you do some, did you read this out loud before you did this? Or before you posted it? Oh, sure. Oh, dude, you're fine. This was actually a really smooth reading, and I could hear Alan's voice. Is he based off anyone that you know? Like, from the moment that he started speaking, I understood exactly what voice I needed for him. I figured. Those are always the best. This was so much fun, though. You said that this was one of your shorter ones, though, right? How long are the others? It's probably a good thing to do, honestly. Makes it a little bit easier, and then you can actually talk to the person about them. Vary from 1,600 words to 2,000K or 200K. Oh, that's. I don't usually do stories that long. I've done them before, but I try to keep them a little bit shorter. How often do you come out with new writings? What I can do is I might add you to. So there's something that I want to do at some point where I will add certain authors to an auto approve list so that they don't have to, I don't have to ask the author each time that I get one from them. And if you would be fine with that, I can try and do that in the future. You write at least a chapter a week, short stories less frequently. Yeah, that's fair. Cool. That actually sounds great. I assume your big long-running story at this point is of Men and Dragons. Oh, you've also got. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm actually looking through the big list. Jeez. Okay. I think we need a little bit of a break. Oh my god. I don't know if. Hold up. Guardian might be short enough. Guardian is one of my own short stories. I tried to do an experiment with Guardian because it's very rarely used that you have a second person perspective. And I wanted to try and put people into the heads of one of the Guardians of the Dark Forest. Actually, all of these. Hold up. All of these should be fairly short. Oh, did that not work? Interesting. I've never done a list. Okay, I'm going to have to fix that. That's a bug in the bot. That should have popped up the info for that story. Oh well. We'll just do a random roll and we'll just go with whatever we get, I guess. Ah, The Blessing, written by Bloody Tears of Rage. That's what actually happens whenever I have a story to work with, or when I've added the author's name in. It does include it when it gets rolled. I will definitely look at some of the other stuff that you've got, though, because that was a really fun read and really easy to read. Okay, before we start this, I do want to remind everyone that we are doing a charity fundraiser for the Rainforest Trust. You can find information about that right here. We are trying to raise $1,000 for me, but $5,000 total across the whole group of streamers that's doing it. And it means a ton to me if anyone donates. All right. So this is The Blessing by Bloody Tears of Rage. The creator had decided, after eons of pondering and consideration, to bring forth a new race into the world, the race of man. His reason for doing so was the same as his reason for every other change he made to the mortal world, that thus would his creation be brought nearer to perfection. Other races had long dwelt within the world, elf and orc, gnome and troll. These folk had divided the world among themselves, and each of them had found a god to bless them and hear their prayers. As a race young and new upon the world, a man would need blessings of his own if he were to stand on an equal footing with these elders. Thus did the Creator summon forth the gods of the world to show them his newest creation and ask that they gift it with some small fragment of their power. And the strongest gods, being crafty and jealous and ever seeking advantages for themselves against the other gods and those they championed against the other races, saw in his new being an opportunity. The war god was the first to grasp this chance. He stood before the new-made man and thrust a spark within his breast, saying, "Man, to you I grant the warrior spirit. You shall stride the world as conqueror and defender. You shall wield lance and blade against all comers. But when you hear my voice in the war drums and the orc horns, you shall cleave to the side of my chosen, the orcs, and shall raise your hands only against the foes of the orcs and none other." And man said simply, "I thank you for this gift." Now came the goddess of beasts and plants. She came before man and placed her own spark tenderly within his breast. "Man, I grant you husbandry. You shall raise and tame the creatures of the world. You shall tend the trees, the stalks and vines, and bring forth wholesome things from the earth. But when you hear my voice in the bird song and the rustling of the leaves, you shall offer your flocks and fields to my chosen, the elves, who are the stewards of life, and whose will in those matters you shall never contravene, no matter your own wants or needs." And man said simply, "I thank you for your gift." The forge god was next. He came to man and offered his spark with a businesslike shove. "Man, I give you industry," he said. "You shall work wood and stone and metal. You shall shape the world with hammer and axe. But my voice is in the ringing of hammer upon anvil, and when you hear it, you shall remember that it is only my chosen, the trolls, who craft the world to their will, and that your own works must only ever support and never seek to supplant your masters." And man said simply, I thank you for this gift. Then came the god of dreams. A spark drifted lazily from his hand and into the breast of man as he whispered, Man, I shall grant you art. You shall have visions of things which were not, are not, and are not yet. You shall bring these visions to the world through word and song, through paint and clay. But when my voice speaks to you in the pluck of strings or the scratch of pens, you will know it is my beloved gnomes who are the true keepers of beauty and glory in this world, and all that you create shall be given unto them for their pleasure. And man said simply, Thank you for this gift. And the four strongest gods were well pleased with themselves, for each felt he had subverted the Creator's wishes to his own advantages, and the advantage of his chosen people. But then stepped forward the goddess of chaos, the ancient, fickle child. She strode boldly past the four strongest gods and directly up to man. She offered no glowing spark to place within his breast, but merely poked him on his forehead with her finger. Man, she said, sounding as though she were stifling a giggle, I grant you free will. You shall go forth and do whatever you want with all these divine gifts, I guess. Or, don't. Whatever, I don't really care. But just know that when you hear my laughter, that means the gods are trying to make you do something you don't want to do. And you should absolutely tell us all to go fuck ourselves. At this, man laughed with delight and threw his arms around the goddess of chaos, who returned the embrace with tickles and kisses. And as the rest of the gods looked on with ever-growing unease and dismay, heaven resounded with the honest, hearty laughter of man and chaos. And the Creator, a faint trace of a smile upon his face, returned to his eternal pondering, knowing that the world of his creation was well and truly one step nearer to perfection. All right. Hope everyone enjoyed that. That actually didn't take very long at all. That was a short one. Story roll. Guardian. Okay. This is the first time that I've ever actually done a reading of my own. I made a couple of edits before I did this. So this is Guardian by me. The forest is dark and full of terrors, and you are one of them. You stand, back resting on one of the massive sequoia trees that make up the bulk of the flora. You can feel the crevices in the bark as they press into your spine. Underneath the bark, you can feel the heat of the salamander's smoke, struggling to keep the illusion in place against the efforts of a being of true reality. In the canopy above, pine cones the size of volleyballs weigh down the branches. Lichens that could pass as poorly maintained fishing nets sway from the boughs, filtering the wind for news. And the wind has news. It always has news. An intruder has entered the forest, stumbling, lost, and unable to see in the nighttime darkness. They are the species your master hates most. Humans. They bring with them stories and change. The moss creeps between your hooves, inching along. Beneath it, the dark forest keepers, the ants, replant and nurture the roots, ever busy. You know that they will eventually return to the scrapyard, that place where all unnatural encroachments on the dark forest laws are taken. Among their many duties, the ants keep the dark forest primordial, removing technological advancements. Your lips curl back, revealing prehensile fangs. As it should be. Mushrooms sprout from the ground around the tree's roots, greeting the cool night air with a ghastly green glow. Your slitted pupils dilate, taking in the new information. Night is long in the forest, and it will be a good hunt. It is always a good hunt. It will always be a good hunt. You snort, annoyed, blasting away several flies that had landed on your bovine nose. Or maybe not always. You watch through the needles as the moon hangs in the sky, shining its unwelcome light through the blessed darkness. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when the night was darker than the rootways were now, and the rootways were darker than the deepest oceans. During that time, the Dark Forest Guardians reigned as the nightmares of the forest. None could match them. That was before you started to think. That was before you needed to think, before she started saving them. Your large moth-like wings shake in anger. She brings light and peace to them, the humans. If you were to hurt them, she brings pain and suffering. You found her once, but as powerful as you are, she is stronger still. You hiss at the memory, limping, speared through the shoulder by one of her bamboo shoots. You delve into one of the entrances to the rootways, into the blessed darkness. But you find something down there, something old and mad and angry and hurt, something worse than her. And so you left. Emerging from the blackness into the moonlight, you stand here now, waiting for the hunt to begin. You stamp your hooves and let out an acrid breath, full of the scent of rot and decay. Guardians are not meant to wait, and you grow impatient. They used to be constantly roaming, not for food, no. You don't need food to stay alive. But they're bound by the laws of the Dark Forest to hunt constantly. The moon begins to set as you continue to watch. Her power begins to wane, and the Dark Forest begins to wake again. You can hear your brothers, monsters from every fairy tale ever told, beginning to move. Even if you rarely see them, the other guardians are always here, connected, a family in monstrosity. You begin to climb the tree, your sharp claws digging into the huge crevices in the bark, finding easy footholds and handholds. The air is cool and fills your lungs with a rattling breath, energizing you for the coming expenditures. There was a time when you were still one with your brothers and sisters, all in one body. You remember the name. Zephnos. That name was dead now, though. It had died when the moon had come back, when she had appeared. You didn't have a name now. No one had given you one. A deep growl rose from your throat. That wasn't entirely true. Monster, beast, abomination. Your prey had named you. None of them stuck, though. Those names died when the givers died in your jaws. At last, you reached the top of the tree and spread your huge wings. They were brown and covered in eyes. In normal moths, those eyes would have been decorative. Not for you. You gaze across the midnight treetops, looking for movement, tasting the wind with your long tongue. You flex your powerful legs and take off. The branches below are not always full of needles. Sometimes they had leaves, and sometimes they had even stranger things. Once you saw a tree that was covered in eyes, just like your wings. But the forest trees were always the same in one aspect, and that was size. It was one of the reasons you had lived for so long. Being able to hide above the treetops gave you a perfect way to watch without being watched yourself. Not that a guardian had much to fear. Guardians didn't hunt other guardians, and they were usually the biggest things in the forest. Usually, but not always. Cinders were a problem. But they were rare and easy to spot from miles away. Vintidiret was the only one of late you had to fear. The ash vine couldn't pose any real threat to you unless it caught you off guard, but its victims could certainly be dangerous. A scar on your left ankle ached where a bear trap had nearly bitten through it. Oh, yes, they could be a problem. And that brought your thoughts to the Vinebound. They were new to the forest, and the guardians didn't know what to do with them. The smarter ones avoided them, but the colossi had all become one with them. It was a plague that was spreading in the forest, and as you traveled, you could see it in the coloration of the leaves. The trees that were affected by the ash vine were smoldering, releasing great plumes of smoke into the air. It was best to avoid those areas. The humans that stumbled into them weren't prey anymore, and couldn't leave. You shake your horned head. Better not to dwell on them. They were just as bound to the forest as you were now. As you sail above the trees, you finally see your prey. A young girl. You lick your lips in anticipation. The hunt wasn't about food, at least not physical food. But that didn't mean you couldn't have some fun. You angle your wings and begin to lose speed, descending into the canopy. Wrapping a powerful arm around a branch, you swing up onto it, allowing your rat-like tail to swing down and find its own purchase. She was running, scared, just like they always were. You sniff the air and snort. She smelled of ash, but not like the vine-bound usually did. She stumbled through the dark, tripping over roots and banging her head on fallen branches. You laugh, announcing your presence. She looks around wildly, screaming. You know she can't see you in the darkness. You begin to move, climbing down the tree. This was an oak, so it was closer to the ground than the sequoia that you had climbed earlier, and you made sure to snap a few of the branches to give away your position. The girl whimpered as they hit the ground with a thud, one after another. A low growl escapes your throat, unbidden. You could smell her fear as you slowly move down the trunk of the tree. She falls over, her foot caught under a rock as she was running. She starts to say something, but you can't make out what the words are. She knows she's about to die. Your claws rasp against the bark as you drop the last few feet, landing with a crash of leaves and moss and broken stone as your full bulk greets the forest floor. You can hear the ants underneath complaining in your head and ignore them. Your eyes begin to glow as a spell begins in your mind. She screams, terrified, and you smell the sweat of urine. You smell the sweat and urine of an animal that is out of its mind with fear. You pull back your jaws, allowing the twin fangs to unfold and release a hiss. She can see you now due to your glowing eyes. Mushrooms sprout as the satyr magic begins its work, illuminating your furry belly, the long claws, your wings, and finally, your boar's head. This is what the hunt was about for the Guardians. It was about making the last memory of the prey into a piece of art. Or at least, that was what it was about for you. And now, to top it off, you suck in your breath and roar. The sound is a mix of an elk's scream and a pig's squeal. It's something that couldn't exist outside of the dark forest, and it was impossible for someone to forget. You knew that, which is why you hated what would come next. A clawed hand slashed out across the girl's neck. Your hand. She was dead almost instantly. As the high of the performance begins to wear off, you fold your wings and turn back towards the oak. They always had to die. That was the final law. Frustration builds in you as you drop to all fours and begin to stalk off into the forest. Why did they always have to die? That was actually easier to read than I was expecting, but then again, I did write it, so I knew what was coming in it. I hope everyone enjoyed that. That was the first time that I've actually written something of my own. Or I've shared something of my own, more correctly. If anyone's interested in a lot of the stuff that happened there, there's a whole world related to it. I've been working on it for a very long time. I wanted that particular story to act as sort of a that Guardian sounds like a big jerk. Pretty much all of them are like that. They didn't As it said in the story, though, the Guardians didn't used to be smart. That one was one of the older ones. The Dark Forest itself is going on 60 years old now, and it's never lasted this long. There's always been something that would stop it before it got to that age. So it's evolving past the point when it, well, would have. Anyway, I hope everyone enjoyed that, but we are pretty much out of time. We have one more story. I'm going to take a look at it real quick, and we'll see if I can possibly do it. Yeah, Death by Magical Court. Ah, yes, this is a two-parter. Nope. I'm going to go ahead and restore that one, and we can do that next time. So I do these usually on Mondays. There we go. But I had a couple of exceptions this time. All right. Anyway, I hope everyone enjoyed all of the stories that we've gone through today. Thank you again, Blackjack, for giving me some leeway and just taking a look at your own stories. I will certainly do that myself. There's too many, not a lot of time, so generally I don't look for stories on my own unless someone has recommended them to me. So it'll be great to actually have a writer that is just willing to let me narrate a lot of stuff. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and call it for now. Right? There we go. That's correct. Oh, thank you for the follow, Ibin. How do you say that? Albin. We're gonna go ahead and raid someone. I don't know who's. Ooh, good person to raid actually. Let me just double check, make sure that they're actually online. Yes, we are going to be raiding Rogenbold then. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, Tenace Games, Zebgrin, Slime Hunter, Walks with Gorillas, my dad, Kremlin Kev, Desalona, Miss Mango Plays, NBFF, Alpha Mango, and Kawoke for continuing to support the stream. If you are interested in supporting any of the stuff that I do, you can do so at Patreon. I do not support myself through Twitch anymore for a lot of reasons at this point. And yeah. Good night, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed Rogenwald. You should ask him about Baldur's Gate. He does challenge runs, but very much enjoys storytelling, just like I do. So he should be a good fit for this. Did the raid not go through? Oh God. Okay, I see. They changed how the raids work a little bit. That's fine. All right. Good night, everyone.